Hi everyone. In this video we're going to take the first step in using Sauce Labs, which is to launch a test from our local development environment and run it against the Sauce Labs automation grid. I'm going to assume in this video that you already have at least one Selenium based test ready to run, and we're going to be using JavaScript. The first thing to consider is whether or not the site under test, that's the site you're testing, is publicly available. If the answer to that is no, then we're going to need to go out to the Sauce Labs website and find the Sauce Connect proxy. You're going to want to find the version that matches your operating system, download it, extract it somewhere you'll be able to find it later. I've already done that, so I'm going to go out to where I extracted it earlier. I'm going to launch a terminal from this folder, and I'm going to run Sauce Connect. Now you'll notice that you will need your Sauce Labs username and your Sauce Labs access key. That is the -U and -K flags you see there. You can ignore the -B flag for right now. Later when we use Jenkins and On Demand will manage the tunnel for you. Okay, so the tunnel's ready. That will let Sauce Labs see our local site. So let's go back to the code. Now I want to give you a little bit of background on this real quick. This code was written against an earlier version of the React.js reference project. Some of this code will likely change as it's migrated over to the Electrode project. And what you see here is pretty typical for an automation project. We have the page object. It abstracts away direct manipulation of the DOM in favor of an API-like call into page functionality. You have your page locators stored together. You have a driver provider which will accept arguments and configure my WebDriver based on those arguments. And a test helper that largely handles common setup and teardown tasks and manages any code path changes that might occur under different run conditions. I didn't want to muddy this demonstration with all of that, so what I've done is I built a demo test class that just has one test, and it pulls a lot of the code handled by the test helper back into itself. We'll continue to use the page object class because I don't think that's going to really impact this demonstration, and we'll use just a little mock object down there to pass in the properties that the page object class expects. Now if you're wondering why you see test prepended to some of these calls, that's WebDriverJs's wrapper for Mocha, and it helps manage promises to a degree. One more quick note. Sauce Labs is not a big fan of the loopback address. Its behavior with 127.0.0.1 can be unpredictable, so I highly recommend you opening your host file and adding some sort of domain that you can point to 127.0.0.1 and reference your site that way. Alright, so let's start by proving that we have a running test. So this will use Chrome driver on my local machine. It will launch the browser, run a quick test, and it passes. Okay, so what we want to do now is to replace my local copy of Chrome driver with a remote server, which is Sauce Labs. So we need to tell WebDriver to use a remote server. We can do that in two different ways. We're going to have to pass in credentials when we want to connect to Sauce Labs. So one way we do that is adding them explicitly in the desired capabilities. Now when we do this, we're overriding what we just did in the line above with the Fluent Builder. So we would have to add the browser name back in. We would add our Sauce Labs username, and we'd add our Sauce Labs access key. And then we would add a call to using server, and that would use the standard on-demand Sauce Labs URL you see here connecting over HTTP. Instead of doing that though, we're going to remove with capabilities. We're going to stick to using for browser. And we're going to connect via a very special URL that connects over HTTPS and includes our username and access key in the URL. All right, I'm going to pause for a second here and discuss credentials. You don't want to hard code your credentials into your project. So what I'm doing is I have a separate file which I do not include in source control, and that has some potential environment variables. My builder classes and my helper classes will look at the arguments I'm passing in and determine if those environment variables are needed, and if so, they'll require this in. So let's go ahead and do that first. All right, now we have those environment variables. So we can start building out this URL. It's going to look like this. That's my username environment variable, colon. We're going to put in our access key. Back to atondemand.saucelabs.com, port 443, connect to the hub. All right, so that's going to connect us to the remote server. Now, at this point, we want to stop and remember that Sauce Labs is a browser automation service. It doesn't really know much about our test. So to get the kind of reporting we want back from Sauce Labs, we have to communicate back to Sauce Labs with some information about our test. And we do that using the session ID. So let's create a variable to hold that. And then with WebDriverJs, the way we'll request that session ID that was created when we started our browser automation session is like this. And that's going to return a promise. And I like that. And in there we will be able to get our session ID back out. And if something goes wrong, we'll just log it to the console. Okay. So that gives us our session, and the next thing we need to do after our test completes is use that ID and communicate back. So first let's set up some variables to hold the information we need. This is the test context. That's going to come back with a string, and we need a 0 or 1 for Sauce Labs. Then we want the test name. We want the suite name. Parent.title. Okay, that's all the properties that we're going to need. Actually, let's go ahead and concatenate these so it'll be a little easier. Okay. Now we're going to step back out to the package.json file. This is in the root of your project. You're going to need the Sauce Labs Web API client. So go ahead and add this as a dependency in your package.json, and you're going to want to go back out to the root of your project and run npm install again when you've done this. Pause the video while you're doing that, and once that is installed, start the video again. Okay, we need to add that as an import, the Sauce Labs client. And we're going to new up a Sauce Labs REST client. We're going to pass in an object that contains our username. And this is not your account password, it is your account access key. Those two things are different. Alright, then we can use that client and the session ID we saved earlier to communicate back with Sauce Labs and give them some information about the current test. We send it an object. The object has a name property, which is going to be our full name, a past property, which will be the 1 or 0. We're hoping for a 1. And this likes to get the optional done. So we're going to go ahead and add that optional parameter, and for good measure, we're going to call it. Alright, this should be everything that we need to run our test against the Sauce Labs automation grid. So let's go find out if we missed something. Alright, so while that's happening, I'll take you out to the dashboard. You'll see that a job is started. You can verify that our tunnel's up, because if that's not up, we're going to have problems. Alright, so this passed. It'll take a second longer for Sauce Labs to be ready. It's gathering up all the metrics that it's going to report back to us. We'll talk more about the Sauce Labs dashboard in another video, but very quickly I'll show you that you can see each step that was required for your test to pass, its final state, and you can look at the posts and responses that occurred during the test. Congratulations, you have just gone through your first successful test using Sauce Labs. Later we'll talk about how to use Jenkins and multi-configuration projects to automate this and run it against multiple environments at once. Thank you for your time.